So, hi everyone. I'm here with Mark Cunningham today. He's the co-founder and director of Whenfresh, and Whenfresh are in the property data business, and they got this property data supermarket they brand themselves as. So, Mark, welcome. Thanks very much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
I thought first off it'd be good just to chat a bit about over the last year. I mean, what have you kind of seen, particularly with the pandemic that's been going on, but where do we sit today, and where do you think we're going to go going forward as well, as we sort of turn as a bit of a turning point really in the UK at least?
Look, it's been weird for everybody, right? So trying to orientate how was 2020. I don't want to do that again. But what I think has been very interesting is the change in customer type that's come to us, if not just the increase in use of data. So what we have seen is a far larger number of what would have been traditional physical businesses, so surveyors or conveyancers or recovery or lending, sticking their hands up saying, look, we really need to start integrating more cleverly with data. And to suggest that they weren't going to do this anyway would be foolish, but I think there was a big amplifier, right? Everybody had to get their new product development on the go. January, whenever the lockdown started, what was it, February 2020? That was like the starting gun for lots of people who probably had this in their development cycle for the next 6, 10, 12 months and said, we'll get around to it. No, you had to do it now. So what we saw was a big alignment in companies going, okay, we really need to start figuring out how we're going to use data because we can't go to a place anymore. We're going to have to figure out what it is from a distance. So that happened regularly, massively, and with intensity.
And how much of a readiness was them for like a process readiness for them to be able to incorporate that into their systems?
Zero. So what we ended up doing, was we did some microsite development to try and give you a place between getting data and being able to pump it into your system, because they weren't systemically ready either. So you build a microsite so they can do a lookup and go, okay, that's the answer, fine, and then they patchworked it. Some lenders we worked with were sharing Excel spreadsheets. I mean, clearly they were doing it safely, but they were still using an end of day Excel to go, look, these are all the things we're doing. What do you know about these places? So it was all hands to the pump, right? But that's normal. That's normal. I remember when the internet travel days started off, I was quite closely involved in that space, and we could see bookings that were being taken online that were being clarified with the hotel via fax. What you see at the front end, what you see at the back end are fundamentally different.
And so do you think we're at a turning point now? So as we sort of come out of, or hopefully come out of the pandemic, and hopefully it's going to improve. I mean, do you think we get a much greater level of data readiness, or do you think we're going to revert back to moving slowly again?
No, I don't think so. Perhaps there'll be a slowing in terms of adoption, because if a company hasn't done it and they've managed to get through this gap, then they know they can just keep going the old way. I think you'll get two drivers of this, right? One is the efficiency change. So people who were going to do it anyway did it quick because they had to. And now you're going to see an economic impact from doing it. Data is cheaper than people. So if you can run a business and you can run it in a data-rich environment and it's cheaper than using humans to do a thing, well, that's sort of going to hit your balance sheet pretty quickly. Or it's going to hit your bottom line, certainly, in a positive way. So I suspect that there'll be a kind of a juddering effect, that those who had to adopt and adapt to the new data world quick because they'd no other option, and there are going to be those who would have been slow but will see the net positive benefits in terms of cash flow. And when that happens, there'll be a follow-through. There is also the unintended consequence that things happen slowly during lockdown, but data was pumped in quickly. Now that lockdown is easing, you can see actions speeding up because data is readily available. So you go from having to use data because you couldn't use people to having data and now people, and therefore things are very quick. And you take a company like MCube. So MCube launched a same-day mortgage. Right? So they can, whoever heard of that, right? But you can do it because all the data is available.
So during lockdown, the other consequences, it's like people had more time. Although it was busy, but like some of the other pressures we would have around, traveling and those kind of things sort of disappeared. I mean, it was busy. I don't want to say it wasn't busy because it was busy for everyone, I think. But the dynamics of like how your time was separated during the day was probably different. So you spent more time.
People were busy adapting, right? So you were busy. You're just doing a different busy.
Yeah,
that's true.
But I mean, if it gives you more time to look at the data, is now when it gets busy, maybe more in the old way with other pressures on time. How much of this will sort of carry on? Do you think?
I know. I think you have companies who were going to make a change who now made a change at the same time.
Yeah.
And also the two industries that we're focused on, which are the lending and insuring industries. Yeah, they're not going away. In fact, I would argue that they're likely to be amplified over the next year anyway. What is interesting is certainly in the insurance space is the amount of data that's been consumed by insurance companies rather than relying on intermediary brokers or relying on price comparison services where you've got micro launches like Hero, Lemonade, Hippo, companies that are effectively, well, they're operating as an MGA, but strictly speaking, it's I, the consumer, are going to give you a very small amount of data on a very small real estate space. So I'm on a phone. I'm going to give you almost no information. I'm here, how much? And now you need to pre-pack all of that data and go, okay, here's your quote. And the move from key and loaded data and see a comparison site with 20 suggestions through to going to one company, giving them that I'm here, go, and getting a quote quickly. That's all data driven. And that I see taking off hugely. On the lending side, similar situation. There is an abundance of data to be able to say, I'd like to borrow against this asset, can I go? And to be able to say yes, because the amount of information that was previously, it was available, but it wasn't networked, it wasn't meshed properly. So you can go, there's nothing wrong with the title, everything's good in terms of restricted covenants, Eden's birth, and whatever. I don't have a problem in terms of the valuation. The thing looks right and it's in the right place and there's no planning restrictions or challenges. That can all be done instantaneously. All of those kind of things that took time are now case capable. Frankly, you can give it an address and go, would I be able to lend on this? And the answer is yes, no.
Yeah. So it's almost like you pre-populate the data from the external data sources. You identify yourself, and then the decision, it helps make the decision almost like probably with extra detail as well, I would think.
Yeah, the process is slightly different to the way you've just described it, but the net effect is the same thing. It is assembling the data at the point of requirement, but so it feels like it's always been there, but you kind of Avengers assembled, just exactly the point in time that you need the answer. And perhaps maybe it's easier to think of it this way. If you can put a reg plate into a car registration plate into a comparison site and get an answer to say that, right, that's how much it'll cost, or put it into Parkers or Glasses and go, okay, that's how much it's worth, then why can't you do that with property? Why can't I just give it an address and go, right, well, that's everything you need to know, go. Why not? All the componentry data is there. It's just in different places. You need to just bring it into one venue to be able to go, okay, go.
And we talked a bit about, I suppose, there in terms of, I suppose, insurance and pre-population and those kind of things. What are the other kind of use cases? Because I know you're very much based around property data, and this idea of this data supermarket, one-stop shop to get all the data around property. I mean, what are some of the other use cases that you've really seen out there and sort of people really adopting?
It's going to be a lot more around decisioning rather than populating with data. So can I, as a business, say these are my business rules, hand the business rules off and say, like, if I meet my business rules, we're good. So actually you consume almost no data, you just get a thumb up, thumb down, go. So I think that there's going to be a big push towards outsourced decisioning. So when you've got outsourced decisioning, then your use case is, well, whatever you want. Like, so we're working with lenders who do whole of lifetime lending, so lending into retirement. Well, that's a 25-year view that you need to take on property based on flooding, subsidence, climate change. Huge. Actually, that's a really big growth area for us, which is kind of surprising. The ESG regulations, so the environmental, social, governance impact, and we can't affect the social and governance view, but environmental certainly. So lenders and insurers asking us about a particular place. Do we think what will it look like in 10 years' time? What will it look like in 20 years' time? What will it look like in 50 years from now? And should we as a lender or insurer be taking a view on that? Which, again, much like Formula One starts to impact how we make normal cars, I think lending and insuring decision will start to impact how we as consumers make decisions about places. So if you were buying a house, you probably want to know, well, what's it going to look like in 20 years from here? Like, well, what will the impact be in flooding is UK's biggest consideration, right? So when we're looking at Californian data, we're looking at wildfire. When you're looking at Florida and that coast, you're looking Gulf Coast, you're looking at hurricane. But UK is all flood. It's majority flood. So you want to be asking the question, am I going to be living in a beautiful riverside view in 20 years' time and when there's no river to see right now? Well, that's a reasonable question to ask.
Yeah. Or a very big river that runs through your lounge, maybe.
Well, isn't that always the case, right? The queries we're being asked. So again, that's a good example. So a query that we get asked is, how high above sea level is the property? How proximate to the sea is it? And what is the slope from shoreline to property? Because that's a consideration. That's something that a lender or a builder or insurer wants to know.
What about? I mean, there's huge volumes of data available. I know you you launched this API, like the Whenfresh API, to give easier access to that. I mean, what have you seen as sort of been the changes that have happened as a result of that? I mean, is it just give easier access? Can you get more data, more detail? What's been the driver behind that? What's the change you've seen?
Right, it's a good question. So the original idea was to co-locate data. So our mental model was that one company's digital exhaust was the next company's digital fuel. A good example would be a transaction. So a sale of a property is once it's gone sold, that's as far as the estate agent is concerned, that's exhaust. But as far as an insurance company or a utility company is concerned, that's firing the starter gun. So you've got a chain of next person finds the next thing, same data, it's just being passed down a chain. So the API principle was, okay, could we take all the data that we know and put it in the same place to figure out what thing was useful for the next company? So the company you're dealing with, well, when they're finished with it, what does the next group want to do with it? And then when you see those kind of patterns taking place, I think this year's big, as I said, the big development, because that's what the users are asking for, is very simplified decision-making models. Just tell me, should I do it or not?
Yeah.
Don't figure out because you might have 30, 40 different data components used in building the thing that says, yes, Chris, you can do this. But you don't want to know the 30 things that go into the cake. You just want the cake, right? You don't need to know having the ingredients listed on the side is interesting, but I don't care. I just want to kind of do it, or can I not do it?
And do you think that's a reaction, just the sheer volume of data? I mean, so it's like, as much as we talk about digital, we talk about data being extremely useful, expanding, but you can get too much. It becomes almost like overwhelming for some folks anyway. And do you think there's a reaction to that?
Yes, because there's this theory in the coding community called zero code. That is, we should be able to produce product and somebody should be able to design it and frankly build it themselves with no coding experience. It's just blocks of pre-useful set data that are coding that goes, if you apply this thing here, then these two things make the answer happen. The same will be true of data. You don't really want to go squirreling through it. If anything, it should be zero analysis. What you just want is the answer. How we use the stuff to discover what the answer is well, you don't care. Really. As long as it's prudent, legal, demonstratively correct, and accountable. As long as those are all true, then all you want to know is, do I or don't I?
And how do you get to that in terms of, is it around that sort of like working or consulting with clients to really understand what the issues are? Because I mean, mathematically, you want to try and solve it in terms of like you get asked the question, what is it you're trying to solve for? What's the outcome you're going to solve for? You need to define it mathematically, right, to be able to do that. You have to be able to do that.
We do. You don't. Yeah. Your ask of us would be, I need to know if I should do a thing. Yeah. And typically we go, right, fine, show me the things that you've done before. You go, here's what success looked like. We did these things successfully. Fine. So what are the data signals that we would have needed in order to tell Chris that was the right thing to do? So you kind of reverse engineer it from success. Okay, so if those were 100 successful insurance policies he wrote, then the things that made them different were size of property, flood risk, age of the property, and building material on the roof. Once he knew that, he was in a good place. Fine. Let's make sure he knows those things from now on. Okay, awesome. So now then we go, Chris, do you need to actually know those things or just want to know that it's good? And then it's the business owner's decision to go, no, I need the underlying data, or I just need to know it's good. I can keep going.
Yeah.
That's a really rough and ready description of the engagement. But yeah, that tends to be how it is. So we won't want to take like zero out consultancy. That's costly and difficult for everybody. And we have a series of tools. We built a set of tools that go, as long as you can describe what successful for you looked like in, because we're in a property space. So what thing happened in what place when it was good? That's it. That's all we need to know. And after that, everything else, all the software we've built just allows us to go, okay,
solve for that.
I know why that was good. And you're absolutely right, by the way. It's hellishly heavy maths behind the scenes.
Yeah.
But nobody hands out medals for good maths unless it's well, no, that's not true. There are medals handed out for big maths, but it's not. That's not what got involved in this.
Yeah, one of the things I love about data, and it's an interesting piece, is actually the linkages between the different data sets, right? That can be, and often the non-intuitive linkages that actually be quite descriptive, right? So, and I think as you look at property data, I was chatting earlier a little bit about linkage of property data back to consumers, and then how does that link through, because people live in houses, and it's like linking your data sets, but also to customers' data sets together is sort of like really where the power comes in,
right.
And you can get sort of quite non-intuitive type findings in some ways, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah, so those typically happen where you have a programmatic AI or machine learning algorithm that's looking for a pattern, but it's not looking necessarily for rationale, or you can have a sort of an intuitive side, a non-intuitive side, which you start off with a thesis and then work your way out and see if the data supports it. But you're right. There's some really funny websites which look at the market price of chickens fees correlates exactly with the propensity for there to be a storm in Alabama. These two things are entirely unconnected.
Correlated but once.
Yeah. No, but it's an incredibly tight correlation. So really, what you're looking at is tight correlations in a practical environment. So. Yeah. Does number of bedrooms or square footage of a thing affect its value? Yeah, of course it does.
Yeah, but I suppose I was also going down the road of like, is there a relationship between, say, for example, on-street pollution or air quality and health, right? So you can start to draw those correlations.
Yeah.
The answer will be in the data, and the insights will be in the data that are probably not things that you might immediately look at, right? So
well,
you take some time to look through.
And we hadn't rehearsed this, but we are actually looking at those particular factors right now, but for a slightly different view. So we've got working with COP to look at the air quality at street level and then air quality at address. And the reason I want to know about air quality at address is that I think it has an effect. We know it has an effect over time, but the hypothesis is if you surface enough data, then you get to a point where you can say this has a meaningful effect on. Is it the longevity of the people living there, the downstream valuation of the property, its condition of sale? There are a whole series of things that you can derive out the back of it. So we're working with this lifetime lender, and the question we were asked was, is there any way where we can start to identify dilapidation in a property without actually going into the property? These people might be there for 35 years or more, God willing. And the thing we were going to stumble upon was if you start looking at about the heat plume output from the roof, the more heat plume output from the roof you can see, the more dilapidation there is in the ceiling condition, and that is hugely correlative with dilapidation generally in the property. So as long as you had an ultraviolet to infrared view of a roof or of roofs over a fixed period of time, you could tell what the condition of the property inside was. Very clever, very carefully correlates.
And the heat condition or the heat coming out of the roof will increase over time as it gradually dilapidates?
Yeah, will increase over time, yeah. Again, it's its nearest neighbor, yeah.
Where can we stop in terms of taking some of those kind of insights? I mean,
I'm hoping nowhere. It's a continuous journey. Keeps it interesting.
So as part of coming up with a hypothesis, you talk about hypothesis is you need a bit of imagination to come up with a hypothesis and like how should these things link together? And someone somewhere's an imaginative person said, well, look, there must be a linkage between the roof and the condition of the house inside. I mean, there's some sort of intuition, and certainly there's quite a bit of imagination in there as well. So as much as it's maths, there's also imagination to come up with the creative scenarios as well. How do you manage that?
So it's a skill set. How does a child? Never got rid of it. Yeah, but that's true. So I work with some, frankly, brilliant people, and when we're hiring, what we're looking for is massively competent people, but that think a little bit off kilter. So I want people working around me that goes. I mean, you spoke to Paul. Paul is brilliant at this. Paul is brilliant, but he can go. Hang on, there's another way of doing this, and that's what you're looking for. You're looking for the type of person who goes, hang on, I'm sure there's another way of doing this. Ken Klemmer, who works with us, is a phenomenal character in that region. Ken came to us from Zoopla. He was head of data at Zoopla. Or Alan Gearing, who's head of data at Rightmove, works with us. Or Alan Dean, He was at he built the checkout service at Tesco.com. Like, well, hang on, what? But if you can do that, then you can build an API for an insurance industry, surely. And if you can do that, and you combine the folks that you've talked to, well, if you can, do the data analysis on a property website, I'm pretty certain we can make this thing work. So it's just about sort of conjoining together people who, they're not thinking in a straight line, and that's fantastic. That's how you get there. There's a little bit of artistry behind the maths. That's what you got to work on.
I had a lot of conversations around data analytics, and it's quite easy, and you see a lot of sort of like linear thinking, and that sort of like non-linear or sort of testing the edges is really fascinating, right? Yeah, really fascinating.
So when we're trying to assemble data for a project, the key that we're looking for is not cleaned data. I don't want it. We can handle that when it arrives. I actually want it to arrive a bit grubby, and the reason is the wrinkles in the leather are where you find the value. Right? So I want to see stuff. Actually, absence of data sometimes is a signal too. Why isn't that known? Like, why do I not have that piece of data on that property? All right, something up here. And what you're looking for is those kind of outside edge cases that go, yeah, but when you add all the outside edgy stuff together, you get a really good view of what you should be focusing on.
Yeah. I suppose it's the science and data science, which is if it doesn't quite fit the model, then you want to try and investigate what's going on. So something else could be going on, and do I need to change that as much as having it fit a perfect.
Well, we were working on a theory that Ken had actually, which was called feature or bug, where we were looking at the impact of floods on house value, and it turns out that the impact of a flood on a house is fundamentally changes depending on where it is. What you thought was going to happen. So the key driver was whether it was a feature or a bug. So if you had a house by the Thames, I don't know if you lived in Putney and you're overlooking the river, we aspire to it one day. But let's imagine you and I are sitting out on the balcony and admiring the river with gin and tonic and Paul. I mean, it was not a big surprise that the basement might flood because there's a river right there, right? So that can't be a surprise to either of us. Whereas if you're in a place where you had absolutely no idea that it was going to flood, it was entirely unenvisaged. That's a bug. That's not a feature. Yeah. And when that happens, the impact on that is so much higher than the impact on something where it was envisaged, so feature or bug, that it's really meaningful. So you've got to start asking, along with the scientific or the mathematic part, you've got to look at the human economics. So if this happened and people were here, would it matter? So to your point about the river at the end of your, when something floods and the ground floor has got a river in it, if you lived on a road, and I live in terraced houses, so let's imagine number 1, which is the bottom of the hill, flooded. Does it devalue my house? I'm in number 100. Probably not. Well, does it take number 2 or number 3 or number 5? I mean, how far up the road when floods have to happen before I'm out of here? This is now problematic.
So I know you also produce. You've been working with the Bank of England, for example. I saw your link on the Bank of England and producing some data from that. I was quite interested in terms of how much more gold do you think there is in some of the data, and particularly some of the micro indicators. So that was a good example. I think it was looking at house valuations and how that's changed over time. And I was wondering, do you get to see some of the trends that are out there? I mean, are there other trends that you think that could be accessible or could be accessible to people that could be useful?
We are tracking a whole lot of things all of the time. The question is, it's the gap between being useful and necessary. Actually. Yeah. So it's all useful. It's just not necessary until we get to this. The Bank of England's index is pretty simple. It's just how house prices are moving. Although the reality is that sitting behind that index is a couple of different other pieces of information, not least of which is speed of deal flow and size of deal flow. So the Halifax price index is quoting the price of houses has gone up by 1% or down by 1%. Well, okay, that's what all humans are pointing at because they're thinking about, it's my house. My house is 1% more than it was last month. That's not important. What's important is how many transacted. Right? So how big is the market? Because you can have house prices going up by 1% if only one house sold and it went up by 1%. So you really need to know the deal flow changed, because that's a really careful indication of what the economic impact is at any point in time. How long is it taking for stuff to go through? Well, that's an issue of liquidity. That needs to be monitored. So in terms of taking that one Bank of England example, no, I think there's many things that come off the back of it. What is the property type that's selling the most right now? COVID happened, and yes, there were many searches for properties which were in a commutable distance but not actually in towns, which had big gardens. Well, no vast surprise there. Although I think that is much more likely to be a non-linear trend. Those who move would have moved anyway. All it did is accelerate the decision to move.
Yeah.
Do I think there's going to be hollowing out of cities? No, not really. I think that the attraction of living in a city will always be attractive to live in cities. There were plagues before. There'll be plagues to come after this one too.
Yeah, and if you look through the historical record, what happened is a lot of people left the city and then they came back 2 or 3 years later, right? So, and so you get these short-term fluctuations in data that can get reversed, right? And I suppose it's trying to look through some of that to really understand what's going on.
Sure. And we have, sorry, we're going slightly down a rabbit hole, but I think there's a cessation of city transactions is true, or at least a downplaying of them. Do I say it dying off? No, not at all. Not at all. Schools haven't moved. Schools are still there. You want to live near the restaurants and the theaters? You will. You don't? You won't. It's what thing is important to you. Moving to a 2-bedroom place with a big old lump of acreage around it's all very well and good, but at one point in time you're going to wake up and realize that you're in the middle of nowhere. So
and you have to be back in the office because you've got a client meeting.
And you have to go back anyway because you've got a client meeting. And as it happens, and I'm living in London and the broadband is terrible. I'm trying to think what it would be like elsewhere. My CTO lives in Huddersfield and he put in a specific ADSL line, so he's having it the time of his life. He's connected up the wazoo. I'm South London. I'm talking to you on dial-up.
Yeah. So I remember those days. I know you've got a whole range of data that's available to you, including like climate data, property data, satellite data. The geospatial stuff was kind of interesting in terms of like some of the photography type. Do you think there's sort of like just confluence of that with things like AI, image recognition, those kind of things, and the interpretation? I mean, is that live? Is that sort of coming down with us? I mean, how much extra information is being asked for that, being as a result of that?
Huge. I have a call after this one with a company that we're partnering with out of Oxford University that's doing 4K walkthroughs that can be generated out of a mobile phone. Then we can use that to do image recognition. You have to be careful, right? So my only concern about it is how much of the information that's seen as you walk through a place is really necessary to see in order to do the job you're being asked to do. I'll put it another way. Would I want somebody walking through my house, recording every single thing they can see, the unmade bed, the pants on the floor, the books I've read, all that kind of gubbins, when in actual fact they're just checking for cracks in the roof? So I think there's going to be a real the image part is the one that concerns me more than anything else. What level of personalization or unpersonalization? So you can see the background here, right? You can see the stuff that I have on my wall. I did that on purpose. I didn't want to have a situation where you're looking at me in some sort of holiday blurry background, because I find that a little bit weird. But that's okay because I've consented to you seeing this thing. When you have a walkthrough for a particular purpose at a particular point in time that's now doing 360 4K views, really? What was that for, and how long do you intend hanging on to it?
But you raise an interesting point around if you take a video or a picture of something, you actually record everything, whereas your mind actually only remembers what you focus on. So if we look at this conversation, or we look at sort of driving to work's a good example, right? You only remember the instances. You actually don't remember most of the journey because your brain.
You're an autopilot.
And how much if we're going into this almost like 100% visual kind of world where everything's recorded, you're actually remembering more than what the human experience would be.
Yes, because I'm permissioning a valuer to come into my house to walk around it for the purpose of valuation. They've got a clipboard or a piece of paper, what have you, and they're doing the thing. I'm talking, when I'm working with stuff, I'm looking at the data that describes the property, so the floor plan, structure, so forth, LiDAR, blah, blah, blah. All the components that go on that allow us to do the job without having to send the human. Okay, there's a hybrid piece that says send somebody through with this 4K wand and they can take pictures in every direction and bring it back. Just like you said, the valuer's there for a purpose. The one to record everything. Really? You're getting awfully close to those dystopian science fiction films where every part of you has been recorded down to the nth.
Yeah. And where do you draw the line though? Because some of the extra stuff that's being recorded actually might be correlated to other things. It might be correlated to the state of the property or those kind of things, which might just be impressions that we would make as a human. But some of it might actually be almost like mathematically indicative that
Yeah.
could be actually useful. But where do you draw the line between? It's almost like the ethics of it. Where should we draw the line?
I agree with you, sir. So we were looking back in the day at the correlation between so RSPB's work and RSPCA's work. There were very, very interesting correlations between environments in which you find animals that require rescuing and environments in which if you found children there, you'd want to get them out too. So it was one of those beneficial side effects of taking good care. But that's the beneficial side effect. There's the negative correlative effect of seeing stuff too and going, well, I now know too much. And your online presence. So people talk the same thing about whatever data is surrendered to, I don't know, Twitter or Facebook or TikTok or whatever your choice of, insert choice of platform. Yeah, but that's you at your best life. Walking through my house, that's me in my life, not my best life. That's my life with pants on the floor. That's the real me. So I'm not sure how much of that I want recorded. I certainly don't want it shared.
Yeah.
So I think the imagery reliance and imagery focus is certainly one. Another thing that I was deeply concerned about, I was talking to there's a particular study. It's blanked, but I'll email you afterwards. I'm sorry, I've forgotten the name of this. Where we were talking about the case around Amazon and their recording of the fingerprint or the sound print of a voice. So if you have an Amazon speaker and it knows me, Amazon knows me because it knows the sound of my voice. If I'm in your house and you also have a speaker, it's able to go, there's Mark, he's in Chris's house. Well, I didn't give Amazon permission to follow me around listening for me, but it does. It really does. Echo was used in a court case in the States where there was a retrieval of a murder because Echo was on all the time. It's ambiently listening all the time. Yeah. Well, it's ambiently listening all the time. So is Sonos. So what? I go into a shop. The shop hears me speak to my wife, and then it goes, I know he's here. Then Sonos knows, and Sonos lets Spotify know where I am, even though I've not got it connected. Yeah. Mercedes brought this thing. They were the first to bring out the car app on your phone. Brilliant. And the idea was not so that it would tell not so that you would see where the car is, but in fact, so the car was recording where you'd gone because they were using it for customer profiling. Well, I didn't think that was the outcome of this. Yeah. You might have agreed to it, and you might have agreed to it in the T's and C's, right? Yeah, you can make anything ambivalent enough to have given your permission away, surely. Yeah, so there are some more ethical concerns around the use of data, its appropriate nature, whether it should be captured or not, what can be done thereafter. Yeah. It's less prevalent in property because we don't deal with the human, we deal with the asset. Yeah. But I mean, I've been in this game for 30 years, so yeah, I've got lots of experience of questions where we had to, because remember there was no GDPR back in the day. In fact, the Data Protection Act was a relatively recent introduction. We were looking at when is permission. Because before then there was a reasonable quality and quantity of data which was non-permissioned and deeply invasive. Mark, thanks very much for making the time. I really appreciate it. It's really fascinating, and I do and I say I appreciate sort of the insights around the data and and what could be done with it. I think it's fascinating. So thank you very much. Oh, it's been a joy. It's really kind. Thank you also for your time. I really appreciate it. Okay.